My wife faked chronic fatigue for 2 years while I did everything. She was furious when I showed the divorce court the receipts. My wife Laura started feeling tired about 2 years ago, right after she got passed over for a promotion at her marketing job. She said she had chronic fatigue that made it impossible to work, clean, cook, or basically function as an adult. She quit her job because sitting at a desk was too exhausting. She stopped doing laundry because carrying clothes was too much. She couldn't grocery shop because walking through stores drained her. She spent most days in bed scrolling her phone, which apparently didn't tire her hands, while I worked 12-hour shifts to cover our bills and then came home to do every household task. When I suggested she see doctors, she said she had, but they couldn't find anything wrong, which proved how serious and mysterious her condition was. She said doctors didn't understand invisible illnesses, and I needed to be more supportive. She actually accused me of ableism when I asked if she'd tried different treatments. She joined online support groups for chronic fatigue, where she'd post constantly about her struggle while I cooked dinner after my overnight shifts. She said typing was different from physical activity, and I wouldn't understand. For 2 years, I did everything. I worked 60 hours a week at the hospital as a radiologic tech, then came home to clean, cook, pay bills, mow the lawn, fix things that broke. Laura would call me at work crying that she tried to make toast but got too tired halfway through. She'd text me lists of things she needed done immediately because waiting made her anxiety worse, which apparently made her fatigue worse. I'd race home on lunch breaks to bring her food because she couldn't make it to the kitchen. My coworkers started calling me a saint, but I just felt exhausted. Laura's family believed everything. Her mother would call me asking if I was taking good care of her baby. Her sister would lecture me about being more understanding of Laura's limitations. Her father said real men supported their wives through sickness and health. Meanwhile, Laura would post inspirational quotes about fighting invisible battles and how the strongest people were fighting diseases nobody could see. She had thousands of followers who called her brave. Then 3 months ago, my coworker Jason mentioned seeing Laura at his gym. I said he must be mistaken because Laura couldn't even walk to the mailbox. Jason showed me a photo from the gym's Instagram of their morning spin class, and there was Laura in the front row. I said it must be old, but the date stamp was from that morning when Laura had texted me she was too weak to get out of bed. I drove to the gym and asked about membership records. The manager couldn't give me details but mentioned their 5 a.m. boot camp was really popular with dedicated members who never missed a class. I started checking our credit card statements more carefully. There were charges at the gym every day at 5 a.m., right after I left for my 4:30 a.m. shift. There were green juice purchases at 6 a.m. when Laura claimed to be sleeping. There were regular charges at the athletic wear store downtown. I installed a tracking app on my own phone and gave Laura the login for emergencies, saying it was for safety. She didn't realize it worked both ways. I could see her location too. Every morning after I left, Laura went to the gym. Every afternoon when I was at work, she went shopping, out to lunch with friends, to the movies. She was living a complete life while texting me that she couldn't get up to use the bathroom without help. One morning, I called in sick to work, but left the house like normal. I waited in the parking lot and watched Laura bounce out of bed the minute my car turned the corner. She changed into workout clothes and practically jogged to her car. I followed her to the gym and watched through the window as she did burpees, mountain climbers, and lifted weights for an hour straight. The instructor high-fived her for never missing a session in 18 months. After the gym, Laura went to brunch with 3 women I didn't recognize. They laughed and chatted for 2 hours while she ate a full meal, the same woman who told me she could barely swallow soup. She went shopping, trying on clothes and walking through store after store. She got a manicure, she went to a movie. Then at 3 p.m., she raced home, changed into pajamas, and got into bed just before I usually came home early to check on her. When I walked in, she was moaning about how hard the day had been just existing. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I started documenting everything. Her fitness app, which was public, showed she'd won dozens of challenges for most active member. Her Instagram Finsta account I found showed her at parties, concerts, hiking trips, all while supposedly bedridden. Her Uber history showed daily trips when she was supposedly too weak to drive. Her friend Ashley had posted photos of their girls' weekends when Laura was supposedly having her worst flare-ups. The final straw was when Laura said she was too sick to attend my mother's funeral. She said travel would set her recovery back months. I went alone to bury my mother while Laura stayed home. That day, her location showed she was somewhere I did not expect. The app showed she was at Serenity Springs Resort and Spa, about 2 hours north. I clicked through the location history and saw she'd been there since 10 a.m. I pulled up their website on my phone. Couples massage packages, champagne brunch, private hot tub suites. I sat in my car in our driveway staring at the screen while my mother was lowered into the ground without me there. My hands started shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. Something inside my chest felt like it was cracking apart. I'd spent the whole day at the funeral home and cemetery thinking Laura was home resting, too weak to travel. She was getting a hot stone massage and drinking mimosas. I put my head against the steering wheel and just sat there for maybe 20 minutes. Then I got out of the car and walked to the front door. My key turned in the lock and I pushed it open. Laura was in bed propped up on pillows watching some reality show on TV. She looked over at me with this tired expression. She said she'd barely been able to get up to use the bathroom all day and asked how the funeral went. Her voice had that weak, breathy quality she always used. I didn't answer. I just walked past the bedroom and went straight to the garage. I'd been keeping old credit card statements in a box on the shelf above my workbench. I pulled it down and dumped everything out. 2 years of paper statements because I'd started printing them out months ago when I first got suspicious. I spread them across the workbench and started organizing by date. The charges were everywhere once I actually looked at them properly. Daily gym memberships at 5 a.m., juice bar purchases right after, Lululemon and Athleta charges every few weeks, restaurant lunches with charges around noon when she texted me she couldn't make it to the kitchen, movie theater purchases in the afternoon, spa appointments, nail salons, hair salons, a charge for $340 at Serenity Springs Resort from this morning. I took out my phone and started photographing everything. Every single statement, every charge, every date. I made a folder on my phone just for these photos. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I felt cold and focused. I went back inside, and Laura called out asking if I could make her some soup. I said I wasn't feeling well and was going to bed early. I closed our bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop. I searched for divorce attorneys in our area. I read through reviews for maybe 2 hours. Most of them seemed okay but generic. Then I found Tyson Burke. His reviews mentioned he was tough but fair. One review said he'd helped a guy whose wife had been hiding income for years. Another said he didn't mess around with people trying to take advantage. I bookmarked his page. Then I started reading about fraud in marriage. Turns out lying about being disabled to avoid working or contributing to the household actually matters in divorce cases. It affects alimony decisions. It affects asset division. Some states consider it financial abuse. I read case after case of people who'd lied about medical conditions and got destroyed in divorce court. Judges really didn't like it when someone faked being sick to live off their spouse. I stayed up until 3 a.m., reading everything I could find. The next morning I called work before my shift started. I told my supervisor I needed the rest of the week off for a family emergency. He actually sounded worried because I'd never called in sick before. He said to take whatever time I needed and asked if everything was okay. I told him it was complicated, but I'd explain later. It felt weird not going to work. I'd worked 60-hour weeks for 2 years straight. I got dressed like normal so Laura wouldn't suspect anything. She was still asleep when I left. I drove to a coffee shop and called Tyson Burke's office. A woman answered and said her name was Savannah. I asked if I could schedule a consultation with Tyson. She asked what the case was about. I said I was filing for divorce and had extensive documentation of fraud. She paused and then said Tyson would definitely want to see me. She asked if I had documentation of the fraud. I said I had 2 years' worth. She booked me for the next morning at 9 a.m. I spent the rest of that day organizing everything on my laptop. I made a spreadsheet of every gym charge with dates and times. I made another spreadsheet of every restaurant and shopping charge. I downloaded Laura's public fitness app data, showing all her workout achievements. I found her Finsta Instagram account again and took screenshots of every post showing her at parties and concerts and hiking trips. I pulled up her Uber history from our shared account and documented every ride. By the end of the day, I had 6 different folders of evidence all organized by category. That night at home, Laura asked why I'd been so quiet. I said I was just tired from the funeral and everything with my mom. She reached over and patted my hand and said she wished she could have been there for me. I looked at her face and didn't recognize the person in front of me. The next morning, I met with Tyson at his office downtown. He was maybe 50 with gray hair and sharp eyes. Savannah brought us coffee and then Tyson asked to see what I had. I opened my laptop and started showing him everything. The spreadsheets, the location data, the fitness app, the Instagram posts, the credit card statements. We went through it all for 3 hours. At one point, Tyson actually laughed out loud. He was looking at Laura's fitness app where she'd won a challenge for most active member 3 months in a row. He held it up next to a screenshot of her Instagram post from the same week about being too weak to get out of bed. He said this was the most clear-cut case of fraud he'd seen in years. Tyson explained that Laura's lies affected everything in the divorce. She'd quit her job under false reasons, which meant she'd forced me to support her financially when she was perfectly capable of working. She'd made me do all the household labor under false pretenses. She'd essentially stolen 2 years of my life and my income. He said judges really hated this kind of calculated deception. He asked if I wanted to file for divorce. I said yes. He asked if I wanted to pursue this aggressively or try to settle quietly. I thought about Laura at the spa while I buried my mother. I said aggressively. Tyson nodded and said he had someone I should meet. He called a private investigator named Khalid Presley. Tyson said before we filed anything, we should document Laura's current activities professionally. That way she couldn't claim the evidence was old or taken out of context. Khalid came to the office that afternoon. He was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with a beard and a camera bag. Tyson showed him all my documentation. Khalid looked through everything, and then said he'd seen plenty of cheating cases but never someone faking a whole disability. He seemed almost excited about it. He said he could follow Laura for a week and document everything she did. Gym sessions, shopping trips, restaurant meals, all of it. Professional photos and video with timestamps. He said it would cost about $2,000. I didn't even hesitate. Tyson said once we had Khalid's report, we'd file for divorce and include everything as evidence. For the next week, I went back to work and acted completely normal at home. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Laura would complain about being tired and I'd nod sympathetically. She'd ask me to bring her things and I'd do it. She'd talk about her online support group and I'd listen. The whole time I knew Khalid was out there following her and documenting everything. I knew exactly what she was really doing while I pretended to believe her lies. Khalid's report arrived by email 6 days later with a subject line that just said, "Documentation complete," and 3 attachments totaling almost 2 gigabytes. I opened the first file at my desk during lunch break and had to close it immediately because my hands started shaking. The photos were crystal clear, professional quality, time-stamped and geotagged. Laura in bright pink workout clothes doing jumping jacks in the front window of the gym at 5:07 a.m. Laura carrying 4 shopping bags out of the department store at 2:34 p.m. Laura laughing with 3 women over mimosas at brunch at 11:15 a.m. The video files were even worse because they showed movement, showed her energy, showed how completely normal and healthy she looked. Khalid had filmed her jogging across the parking lot to her car after spin class, her ponytail bouncing, not even slightly out of breath. He'd captured her trying on clothes in a store window, doing squats to test how pants fit. He'd recorded her at the movies buying popcorn and candy, carrying the heavy tray up the stairs to her seat without any trouble. Every single piece of evidence was dated within the past week, and every single day I'd come home to find her in bed claiming she'd barely managed to stay conscious. I forwarded everything to Tyson without adding any message because I didn't trust myself to type anything coherent. Tyson called me 20 minutes later. He said we needed to meet again as soon as possible and asked if I could come to his office after my shift ended. I got there at 4:30 p.m. and found him in the conference room with all my previous documentation spread across the table, plus printouts of Khalid's new photos arranged in neat rows. Tyson looked at me and said this was more than enough to file for divorce. He said we could request that Laura pay my attorney fees because her fraud had caused me significant financial harm. He explained that judges had discretion to order fee shifting when one spouse had engaged in serious misconduct and faking a disability for 2 years definitely qualified. Then he suggested I write out a detailed account of the emotional and financial toll her deception had caused me. He said it would help the court understand the full scope of what she'd done and why I deserved a favorable settlement. He asked if I could handle writing something like that, or if I needed help organizing my thoughts. I told him I'd been organizing these thoughts for months, and I could definitely write it all down. I spent the next 3 days writing during every spare moment I had. I started with the day Laura first claimed to be too tired to work, and traced everything forward from there. Every morning I'd rushed home on my lunch break to bring her food. Every evening I'd cook dinner after working a 12-hour shift. Every weekend I'd spent doing laundry, grocery shopping, cleaning the house, mowing the lawn in 100-degree heat while she watched from the bedroom window with the air conditioning on full blast. I wrote about the times she'd called me at work crying because she'd tried to make toast and got too exhausted halfway through. The nights I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. doing dishes and paying bills because there was nobody else to do it. The vacation days I'd used to take her to doctor appointments where she'd lie to physicians about symptoms she didn't have. The thousands of dollars in medical bills for tests that found nothing wrong because nothing was wrong. The birthday parties and family gatherings I'd attended alone because Laura was too sick to go. The promotions at work I'd turned down because I couldn't take on more responsibility when I was already stretched too thin. My mother's funeral that I'd attended by myself while Laura went to a spa. When I finished, the document was 40 pages long, single-spaced, and reading it back made me feel sick. I'd lost 2 entire years of my life to her lies. I emailed the timeline to Tyson and he called me the next morning. He said it was perfect, exactly what he needed, and he was sorry I'd gone through all of that. Then he told me Savannah was going to organize everything into a comprehensive evidence package for the divorce filing. He said it would include the financial records showing Laura's spending, the location data from the tracking app, the social media posts where she'd lied about being bedridden, witness statements from Jason, and the gym manager, medical records proving Laura had no actual diagnosis of chronic fatigue, Khalid's surveillance photos and videos, and my 40-page timeline. He said when he was done putting it all together, it would be devastating and thorough enough that Laura's attorney would take one look and know they had no case. Tyson asked if I was ready to move forward with filing. I said yes. He said he'd have the papers ready by early next week, and we'd arrange to serve Laura when I wasn't home, so I wouldn't have to deal with her immediate reaction. He also suggested having Khalid position himself nearby during the serving to document whether Laura maintained her sick act when she thought nobody was watching. I agreed to everything and felt this strange sense of calm settle over me. It was finally happening. The next Tuesday morning, I left for work at my usual 4:30 a.m. time and texted Tyson that I was gone. The process server was scheduled to arrive at the house at 9 a.m. when Laura would definitely be back from the gym and pretending to be asleep. Khalid was parked down the street with his camera ready. I went through my shift on autopilot, scanning patients and filling out reports while my phone sat in my locker because I didn't want any distractions. At 10:15 a.m. during my break, I finally checked my messages and found 3 texts from Khalid. The first said, "Papers delivered at 9:04 a.m. She answered door in pajamas." The second said, "She read for approximately 2 minutes, then made phone call." The third said, "No signs of illness or weakness. Observed subject pacing house for 1 hour." While gesturing angrily on phone, appeared very agitated but fully mobile. Attached were photos showing Laura through the front window, walking back and forth rapidly, waving her arms, her face red and angry. No hint of fatigue anywhere. At 11:30 a.m., my phone started ringing. Laura's name flashed on the screen and I almost didn't answer, but then decided I wanted to hear what she'd say. I picked up and she immediately started screaming about the divorce papers, about how I was abandoning her during her illness, about how cruel and heartless I was being. Her voice was strong and loud, no weakness or tiredness in it at all. I waited until she paused for breath and then said very calmly that I knew about the gym. I knew about the spin classes and the boot camps and the personal training sessions. I knew about the spa she went to while I buried my mother. I knew about all of it, and I had proof. Laura went silent for about 5 seconds and then started crying, these big dramatic sobs. I hung up. Within 2 hours, Laura's mother called me. She was yelling before I even finished saying hello, telling me I was cruel and heartless for divorcing a sick woman, telling me I'd made vows for better or worse, telling me her daughter needed support, not abandonment. I didn't say anything, just opened my email and sent her a selection of Khalid's photos. Laura doing burpees at the gym, Laura carrying shopping bags with both arms, Laura jogging across a parking lot. I attached them to an email with no subject line and no message and hit send while her mother was still yelling in my ear. Then I blocked her number and went back to work. 40 minutes later, Laura's sister called. She started with almost the exact same speech about how sick Laura was and how terrible I was being. I interrupted her and asked if she'd checked her email lately because I'd sent her the same photos I'd sent their mother. She went quiet, and I heard clicking sounds like she was opening her computer. Then silence for a long time. Finally, she said, "Oh my God," in this really quiet voice. Then she hung up without saying anything else. At least one person in that family was capable of seeing reality when it was right in front of them. I left work early and drove straight to an extended stay hotel near the hospital. I'd already looked up prices and availability during my lunch break and knew exactly which one I wanted. I checked in for a month, paid with my own credit card that Laura didn't have access to, and went back to the house to pack. I took my clothes, my laptop, my important documents, and nothing else. Everything else could stay or burn for all I cared. I was loading the last box into my car when my phone rang again. It was Tyson calling to check if I was okay, and to tell me that leaving the house wouldn't hurt my case at all, since we had extensive documentation of why I was leaving. He said I needed space from Laura's manipulation attempts, and the court would understand that completely. I told him I was already packed and heading to the hotel. He said good, and he'd be in touch about next steps. I drove away from that house and didn't look back once. The hotel room became my base for the next 3 days, while my phone turned into a battlefield. Laura's texts started coming in waves around midnight that first night. These long messages about how much she loved me and how we could work through this together if I just came home. By 2 a.m., the tone shifted completely, and she was calling me cruel and heartless for abandoning someone with a disability. I took screenshots of every single message and sent them to Tyson in the morning. He responded within an hour saying this was perfect documentation of her manipulation tactics and to keep saving everything she sent. The pattern continued for days with Laura cycling between desperate apologies and angry accusations, sometimes switching moods in the same text thread. I stopped reading them after a while and just screenshotted them automatically whenever my phone buzzed. On day 4, I was scrolling through social media during a break at work and saw that Laura had posted a long statement about her situation. She wrote about how her husband had abandoned her during the darkest period of her chronic illness journey, how she was facing divorce while barely able to get out of bed, how the stress was making her symptoms worse than ever. The post had thousands of reactions within hours, and the comments section filled up with people calling me terrible names and saying she deserved better. Her followers were organizing meal trains and offering to help her with daily tasks since her cruel husband had left her alone. I felt this urge to comment with the truth right there, to post the gym photos and the tracking data and let everyone see what she really was. My fingers hovered over the reply button for a solid minute before I remembered what Tyson had told me about letting her dig her own hole. I closed the app and went back to work. 2 weeks after I moved out, Tyson called to tell me that Laura had hired legal representation. Her attorney was someone named Milo Howell, and his first move was requesting mediation before proceeding with the divorce. Tyson actually laughed when he told me this and said it meant their position was weak and they wanted to avoid the discovery process where all our evidence would become official court record. He explained that mediation was actually good for us because it gave us a chance to present everything we had in a controlled setting and watch their case fall apart in real time. I asked if we had to agree to it, and Tyson said we should because it would either result in a quick settlement on favorable terms or prove to the court that Laura was being unreasonable when we eventually went to trial. We scheduled the mediation session for 2 weeks out, which gave Khalid more time to gather current documentation of Laura's activities. During those 2 weeks leading up to mediation, I heard from multiple people that Laura was telling everyone I was having some kind of mental breakdown. Her story was that the stress of caring for her had caused me to develop paranoid delusions, and I was imagining her doing things she physically couldn't do. Her mother apparently believed this completely, and started organizing a meal train through the neighborhood for her poor sick daughter, whose husband had lost his mind. I watched from my hotel as neighbors I barely knew started showing up at the house carrying casseroles and covered dishes, these kind people who thought they were helping someone in need. It made me angry in a way I hadn't felt before because Laura was manipulating good people into enabling her lies. Khalid earned every penny of his fee during those 2 weeks. He positioned himself near the house during meal train delivery times and captured everything on video. The footage showed Laura answering the door moving slowly and weakly, accepting the food with trembling hands and grateful tears, playing her sick role perfectly for the neighbors. But Khalid kept filming after they left and caught her carrying the casserole dishes into the kitchen with both arms, moving normally, then changing into workout clothes and jogging to her car 20 minutes later. The best footage came when one of the neighbors, an older woman from 3 houses down, happened to be getting her mail when Laura came out in full athletic gear and jogged past her to the car. The neighbor's face in the video showed pure confusion as she watched Laura move with perfect health and energy, clearly trying to process what she was seeing versus what she'd been told. Khalid captured the whole interaction from across the street. Jason caught me in the break room at work one afternoon and said he and 2 other techs wanted to write statements for my divorce case. He'd apparently told them what was happening, and they all remembered the past 2 years of watching me come to work exhausted, rushing home constantly to take care of Laura, missing breaks to bring her things she needed. They wanted to document how worn down I'd been and how much I'd sacrificed trying to support someone who was supposedly too sick to function. I thanked Jason and felt something unexpected, this warmth in my chest that I realized was gratitude for people actually seeing what I'd been through. Their support meant more than I knew how to express. The morning of mediation arrived and I met Tyson and Savannah at his office an hour early. The conference table was covered with 3 thick binders, a laptop already queued up with video footage, and a printed timeline of the past 2 years that Savannah had spent days perfecting. Tyson looked at the evidence spread out before us and said we were going to make this quick and clear. He walked me through exactly how the session would go, what questions the mediator would ask, how Milo would try to frame things, and when we would present each piece of evidence for maximum impact. Savannah had organized everything with colored tabs and notes, so Tyson could find any specific document in seconds. I felt prepared in a way I hadn't expected, like we were going into battle with superior weapons. We arrived at the mediation office 15 minutes early and watched through the lobby window as Laura pulled into the parking lot. She got out of her car moving completely normally, walking with regular speed and posture toward the building entrance. But the second she came through the door and saw me sitting in the lobby, her whole body changed. She started moving slowly like every step hurt, her shoulders hunched forward, one hand bracing against the wall for support. It was such an obvious performance that I almost said something, but the mediator had come out to greet us, and I saw him notice the sudden change too. He glanced at Laura, then at me, then made a small note on his clipboard before leading us into the conference room. Milo started the session with this long speech about how devastating chronic illness had been for Laura and how she needed support and understanding, not abandonment during her darkest time. He talked about invisible disabilities and how the stress of divorce was making her symptoms significantly worse. He painted me as someone who'd given up on his marriage vows the moment things got difficult. Tyson let him finish his whole speech without interrupting, just sitting there with his hands folded on the table looking completely calm. When Milo finally stopped talking, Tyson reached for the first binder, opened it to a tabbed section, and slid a stack of photos across the table showing Laura doing burpees at the gym. The mediator picked up the photos one by one, studying each date stamp carefully before looking up at Laura. She asked Laura to explain these images. Laura's face crumpled and tears started running down her cheeks as she said the photos had to be old, that someone must have mixed up the dates. Tyson didn't even look up from his notes when he pointed out that the date stamps were from the past 3 weeks, clearly visible in the bottom corner of each photo. He slid his finger across one image showing Laura mid-burpee with last Tuesday's date printed right there. Laura opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Tyson reached for his laptop and turned it toward the mediator. He pressed play on a video showing Laura in bright pink workout clothes doing high-intensity interval training. The footage showed her jumping, sprinting in place, doing mountain climbers without any sign of weakness or fatigue. The mediator's face changed as she watched, her professional, neutral expression shifting to something that looked a lot like disgust. She glanced at Laura, then back at the screen, then at Laura again. Milo had gone completely still in his chair, staring at the table like he wanted to sink through it and disappear. His earlier confidence had evaporated. Laura tried to recover by saying she was having good days, that I was making it sound worse than it really was. She said everyone with chronic fatigue had good days and bad days, and I was exaggerating how often she felt well enough to exercise. Tyson let her finish talking before he opened the second binder. He pulled out a printed membership record from the gym and slid it across the table. The record showed Laura had attended classes 340 times in the past 18 months. He had highlighted the attendance pattern showing she never missed more than 2 days in a row during that entire period. The mediator picked up the document and read it carefully, her lips pressing together in a thin line. The mediator set down the gym records and asked Laura if she had any medical documentation of her chronic fatigue diagnosis. Laura said her doctors didn't really understand her condition, that it was complicated and hard to diagnose. The mediator asked for the names of the doctors who had treated her so they could verify her medical history. Laura hesitated, her eyes darting to Milo and then back to the mediator. She said she couldn't remember their names right now, that she'd seen several doctors over the years, and it was hard to keep track. The mediator made a note on her pad, and I could tell she wasn't buying any of this. Tyson opened the third binder and presented a financial analysis that Savannah had spent days preparing. The numbers showed Laura had spent over $35,000 during the 2 years she claimed to be too sick to work. The breakdown listed gym memberships, personal training sessions, expensive activewear from specialty stores, spa treatments, and regular social activities. Each category had receipts and credit card statements attached. Tyson walked through the numbers slowly, letting each figure sink in. The mediator's expression grew harder with each page she turned. Milo cleared his throat and asked if they could have a private conference with his client. The mediator nodded and gestured toward a smaller conference room down the hall. Milo stood up quickly, and Laura followed him, moving with normal speed and posture until she seemed to remember her act. We could hear them through the door even though they'd closed it. Laura was crying, and Milo was speaking in sharp, quiet tones that got louder as the conversation went on. I caught phrases like, no credibility, and need to be realistic here. When they came back 15 minutes later, Laura's whole demeanor had changed. She wasn't crying anymore, and she wasn't trying to look weak. She just looked cornered. The mediator asked Laura directly if she had fabricated or exaggerated her illness. The room went completely silent. Laura stared at the table for what felt like forever. Finally, she said she'd been depressed after not getting the promotion at work, and things had gotten out of hand. She said the gym had helped her mental health and she just needed time to figure things out. She never actually said she'd lied about being sick. She talked around it using words like misunderstanding and communication problems. The mediator wasn't having it. She asked Laura to clarify whether she'd been physically unable to work and do household tasks as she'd claimed. Tyson didn't wait for Laura to answer. He pulled out my 40-page timeline and the statements from Jason and my other co-workers. He explained how I'd worked myself to complete exhaustion for 2 years based on Laura's lies. He read parts of the co-worker statements describing how I'd looked during that time, how I'd rush out on lunch breaks to take care of Laura, how I'd fall asleep at my desk between shifts. He showed the timeline of Laura's texts claiming she couldn't get out of bed matched against her location data, showing her at the gym or shopping. The mediator looked at Laura with open contempt now. There was no neutral professional mask anymore. Milo jumped in quickly and suggested that Laura was willing to waive alimony and accept a 40 to 60 asset split in my favor if we could settle this quickly and avoid further proceedings. His voice had lost all its earlier authority. Tyson didn't even pause before countering. He said we wanted no alimony, a 70-30 asset split in my favor, and Laura would pay my attorney fees due to fraud and deception. He laid out each term clearly and waited. The mediator was writing everything down, but I could tell from her face that she thought Tyson's terms were fair. Laura started to argue, but Milo cut her off with a sharp gesture. He said they needed another private conference. This time when they left the room, we could hear Laura's voice rising almost immediately. She was saying something about how this wasn't fair, how she shouldn't have to pay for everything. Milo's voice came back firm and loud enough that we could make out the words. He told her she had no leverage here, that if this went to court she'd be lucky to walk away with anything at all. He said the judge would see the same evidence we just presented, and it would be even worse for her. Laura's voice got quieter, but we could still hear her crying. They walked back into the room 20 minutes later, and Milo looked like he'd aged 5 years. Laura's eyes were red and puffy, but she wouldn't look at me or anyone else. Milo sat down and cleared his throat before speaking. He said they accepted all our terms without any changes. No alimony payments from me to Laura. A 70-30 asset split with me getting the larger share. Laura would pay all my attorney fees, the divorce would be uncontested, and we'd move forward without any further disputes. Tyson nodded and made notes on his legal pad while the mediator started typing up the agreement. Laura sat there staring at the table with tears running down her face, but she didn't make a sound. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she looked smaller somehow, like the fight had gone out of her completely. The mediator printed out preliminary agreements and slid them across the table to each of us. She explained that these weren't the final divorce papers, but they locked in our terms and showed we'd reached a settlement. She said the final divorce hearing would be scheduled for 6 weeks from today, and as long as both parties showed up, it would be a quick process. We all signed where she indicated, and she collected the papers to file with the court. The whole thing took maybe 10 minutes, and then it was done. Laura stood up quickly and walked out without saying anything to anyone. Milo gathered his briefcase and followed her out after shaking the mediator's hand. Tyson and I stayed behind for a few minutes while he made copies of everything, and the mediator gave us the court date information. When we finally walked out to the parking lot, I expected to see Laura's car already gone, but instead, I saw her sister standing next to a silver sedan. She saw me and actually walked over instead of avoiding me like I expected. She stopped a few feet away and looked uncomfortable but determined. She said she needed to apologize for not believing me sooner and for lecturing me about being more supportive. She said she'd looked at all the evidence Tyson sent, and she felt sick about how she'd treated me. She said she should have questioned things more instead of just accepting Laura's version of everything. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and told her I appreciated that. She asked if Laura was still inside, and I said she'd already left. Her sister sighed and said their mother was still in complete denial about the whole thing, but their father had looked at the evidence and told Laura she brought this entirely on herself. She said her dad had been furious when he saw the gym records and the location data from Mom's funeral day. She said it was a small thing, but it mattered that someone in Laura's family actually saw the truth instead of making excuses. I told her it did matter, and I was glad someone was willing to look at the facts. She gave me a sad smile and said she hoped I'd be okay, and then got in her car and drove away. Over the next month, I threw myself into work and tried to stop thinking about the past 2 years constantly. My supervisor noticed I seemed distracted and asked if everything was okay. I told him I was going through a divorce, and he was understanding about it. He said to let him know if I needed any time off for court dates or anything else. I started seeing a therapist that Tyson recommended, who specialized in dealing with betrayal and relationship issues. The first session was awkward because I didn't really know where to start, but the therapist asked good questions that helped me open up. I told her everything about Laura's fake illness, and how exhausted I'd been, and how guilty I felt about divorcing her even though I knew she'd been lying. The therapist listened carefully and then said something that hit me hard. She said what Laura did was a form of financial and emotional abuse. She explained that Laura had deliberately manipulated me into supporting her financially while she lived a secret life. She said the guilt I felt was actually a result of Laura's manipulation, making me believe I was abandoning a sick person, when really I was protecting myself from someone who'd been using me. That perspective helped more than I expected. I stopped feeling like I was the bad guy for wanting out of the marriage. I started sleeping better and eating regular meals again instead of just grabbing whatever was quick. Laura moved out of the house 2 weeks after the mediation. She came by one afternoon while I was at work and took her clothes and personal items. I got home to find half the closets empty and her bathroom stuff gone. She left her key on the kitchen counter with no note or anything. I found out later from her sister that Laura moved in with her mother, who apparently still believed Laura had really been sick, and I was the villain who abandoned her. Her mother had been posting things on social media about how cruel the world was to people with invisible illnesses and how families should stick together no matter what. Some people will believe what they want regardless of how much evidence you show them. Laura's mother had decided I was the enemy, and nothing was going to change her mind. I started going through the house more carefully after Laura moved out. I wanted to pack up anything she'd left behind and get it out of my space. In the back of the master bedroom closet, I found shopping bags stuffed behind old suitcases. There were bags from expensive stores downtown with clothes that still had tags on them. Designer workout gear that cost more than my entire wardrobe. I found receipts stuffed in drawers all over the house for things I'd never seen. Hundreds of dollars at restaurants I'd never been to, spa treatments every other week, concert tickets and movie stubs. There was a second phone hidden in a box in the garage that she must have forgotten about. When I charged it up and looked through it, I found group chats with friends I'd never heard of where they made plans for girls' trips and shopping days and brunch meetups. The phone had photos of Laura at parties and concerts and hiking trails, looking completely healthy and happy. It was like discovering that a complete stranger had been living in my house for 2 years. Someone I didn't know at all had been sleeping next to me and lying to my face every single day. Laura's social media started getting interesting around this time. She'd been posting her usual stuff about being sick and struggling, but then suddenly she posted about moving to a new place and being excited for a fresh start. People in her comments started asking questions about how she was suddenly well enough to move and be active. Some of her followers who'd been following her illness journey for 2 years started putting pieces together. They asked why she'd been posting about being bedridden last month, but now she was posting photos of herself carrying boxes and setting up furniture. A few people straight up called her out and asked if she'd been lying about being sick. Laura tried to explain that she'd been having good days and bad days, but her explanations didn't make sense with her previous posts. More people started questioning her story, and some got pretty mean about it. Within a week, she deleted all her social media accounts completely. Her inspirational chronic illness accounts with thousands of followers just disappeared overnight. Then something unexpected happened. A woman named Kylie Whitfield contacted Tyson's office and asked to speak with him about my case. Tyson called me and said this woman claimed to be one of Laura's friends from the gym, and she wanted to provide information. I told him to talk to her and see what she had to say. Tyson met with Kylie and then called me afterward. He said Kylie had been in Laura's regular morning workout group for over a year, and she'd become friendly with Laura during that time. Kylie said she'd seen the news about the divorce on social media through mutual friends, and she felt like she needed to come forward. She told Tyson that Laura used to brag about having a free ride at home. She said Laura would joke about her husband being a sucker who believed she was sick while she lived her best life. Kylie said she'd thought Laura was exaggerating or joking at first, but then Laura kept making comments about how easy it was to fake being tired and how I'd do anything she asked. Kylie said she felt guilty now for not saying something sooner, but she hadn't realized how serious it was. Tyson asked if she'd be willing to testify if needed, and Kylie said absolutely. Hearing that Laura had actually bragged about fooling me made my blood boil. It was one thing to know she'd lied, but knowing she'd laughed about it with her friends were a whole different level of betrayal. The divorce hearing finally arrived 6 weeks after mediation. I met Tyson at the courthouse early in the morning, and we went through the final paperwork one more time. He said this should be straightforward since everything was already settled and agreed upon. We just needed the judge to review the evidence and grant the divorce with our terms. Laura showed up with Milo right before the hearing started. She looked different somehow. Thinner maybe, or just tired. She didn't try to talk to me or even look in my direction. We went into the courtroom and the judge called our case. The judge was a woman in her 50s who looked like she'd seen everything. She reviewed the mediation agreement and then asked if both parties agreed to the terms. Milo and Tyson both confirmed we did. Then the judge asked to see the evidence that led to this particular settlement. Tyson handed up our evidence binders, and the judge spent about 10 minutes looking through them. She looked at the gym records and the location data and the financial statements. She looked at the photos of Laura working out and the timeline I'd written. Her expression got harder as she read. Finally, she looked up at Laura and made some pointed comments about fraud and deception in marriages. She said she'd seen a lot of things in divorce court, but deliberately faking a disability to avoid contributing to a household was particularly troubling. She said the settlement terms were more than fair given the circumstances, and she was granting the divorce exactly as we'd agreed. She signed the papers and told us we were legally divorced as of that moment. The whole hearing took maybe 20 minutes. I walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine, feeling like I could breathe properly for the first time in months. Tyson walked out with me, and we stood on the courthouse steps for a minute. He shook my hand and said this was one of the most clear-cut cases of marital fraud he'd handled in his career. He said most of his divorce cases involved gray areas, and he said she said situations, but this one had been black and white from the start. He said I'd done everything right by documenting thoroughly and not confronting Laura until I had solid proof. I thanked him for everything, and he said to call if I needed anything else, but he doubted I would. I watched him walk back to his office, and then I got in my car and just sat there for a few minutes. I was legally single. I had 70% of our assets. I didn't owe Laura anything. She was paying my attorney fees. After 2 years of being used and lied to and exhausted, I'd actually won. It felt strange and good and sad all at the same time. I started the car and drove back to work because I had a shift that afternoon, and sitting around thinking about it wasn't going to help anything. I got back to my apartment that evening and sat on the couch staring at my phone. Part of me expected Laura to call or text something, but there was nothing. The silence felt weird after 2 years of constant demands and complaints. I heated up some leftover pizza and ate it while watching a basketball game, something I hadn't been able to do in forever because Laura always needed the TV for her shows. My phone rang around 9, and I saw it was Laura's mother. I almost didn't answer but figured I should get it over with. She started talking before I even said hello, her voice high and shaky. She said Laura was really struggling now and barely getting out of bed. I actually laughed at that, which made her go quiet for a second. I told her Laura was perfectly capable of working and taking care of herself, and that she'd been doing exactly that for 2 years while pretending otherwise. She tried to argue, but I just said I was done and hung up. Then I blocked her number and Laura's sister's number and Laura's father's number. I blocked everyone from that whole family because I didn't owe them explanations or updates or anything else. The next few weeks I focused on selling the house. I couldn't stand being there anymore with all the memories of coming home exhausted to do more work while Laura lounged in bed. Every room reminded me of something she'd claimed she couldn't do. The kitchen where she said she was too tired to make toast. The laundry room where carrying clothes was apparently impossible. The bedroom where she'd spent hours on her phone while I mowed the lawn in 100-degree heat. I hired a realtor and she said the market was good. We listed it on a Thursday and had 3 offers by Sunday. I accepted the highest one and started packing my stuff. Laura had already taken most of her things when she moved to her mother's place, so there wasn't much to sort through. The closing happened 6 weeks later, and I walked away with enough money for a solid down payment on a smaller place. The realtor shook my hand and said congratulations, and I felt lighter than I had in months. I started looking at townhouses closer to the hospital because my commute had been eating up 2 hours a day between driving and traffic. I found a nice 2-bedroom place about 15 minutes from work with a small yard and updated kitchen. The mortgage was less than what I'd been paying on the old house, which meant more money in my pocket each month. I signed the papers and moved in on a Saturday. Jason helped me carry boxes up the stairs and we ordered pizza after. He looked around the empty living room and said it was a good, fresh start. I agreed. For the first time in 2 years, I came home to a clean space that I wasn't responsible for maintaining entirely alone. There were no dishes in the sink because Laura had been too tired to clean them. No laundry piled up because carrying clothes was too exhausting. No list of urgent tasks waiting for me. Just my own mess, which was basically nothing compared to what I'd been dealing with. Work became enjoyable again once I wasn't constantly stressed about rushing home. I could actually focus during my shifts instead of wondering what emergency Laura would text me about next. I started taking my full lunch breaks and eating in the cafeteria with other people instead of racing home to bring Laura food. My supervisor pulled me aside one day and said I seemed like a different person, more energized and present. She said whatever I was doing was working and to keep it up. I thanked her and realized she was right. I felt like myself again for the first time since Laura started her whole chronic fatigue act. I started reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during those 2 years. My buddy Noah from college lived across town, and I hadn't seen him in forever because I never had time. I texted him and we met up for drinks. He said he'd noticed I was struggling but didn't know how to help. He said he'd tried inviting me to things, but I always said no because I had to get home to Laura. I explained what had actually been going on, and he just shook his head. He said he was glad I got out and that I had my life back. We made plans to hang out regularly and actually followed through. Same thing happened with a few other people. They all said they'd seen me disappearing into this exhausting routine and felt helpless to do anything about it. Having them back in my life felt good, like reclaiming parts of myself I'd lost. Jason and I started playing basketball on weekends at the court near his apartment. I used to love basketball before Laura's fake illness took over my life, but I'd been too exhausted to do anything except work and chores. The first time we played, I was rusty and out of shape, but it felt amazing to just run around and shoot hoops without worrying about getting home. We played every Saturday morning and sometimes grabbed breakfast after. Jason said he was proud of me for handling everything the way I did, with documentation and lawyers instead of just blowing up at Laura. I told him I'd wanted to blow up at her plenty of times, but knew that wouldn't help my case. Getting back into hobbies like this felt like reclaiming parts of myself I'd thought were gone forever. 6 months after the divorce, I was doing my grocery shopping on a Wednesday evening when I turned down the cereal aisle and saw Laura at the register. She was wearing a store uniform and scanning items for an older woman with a full cart. I froze for a second, then kept walking toward the checkout lanes. Laura looked up and saw me and her face went pale. She quickly looked back down at the items she was scanning and didn't acknowledge me at all. I got in a different line and paid for my groceries, and when I walked past her register on the way out, she was staring hard at the scanner like it was the most interesting thing in the world. The whole interaction lasted maybe 2 minutes, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, nothing. She was just some person I used to know who worked at the grocery store now. I loaded my groceries in the car and drove home and didn't think about it again. My therapist helped me work through the anger and betrayal over the next several months. At first, I was furious every time I thought about those 2 years of being used and lied to. But gradually, that anger faded into something more like indifference. She helped me see that Laura wasn't worth my emotional energy anymore. She'd made her choices and faced the consequences, and I'd moved on with my life. The realization that I genuinely didn't care what happened to Laura felt like freedom. I wasn't carrying around this weight of betrayal and hurt anymore. She was just someone from my past who I had no connection to, and that was perfectly fine. I started dating casually a few months later. Nothing serious, just meeting people through apps and going to dinner or movies. It was nice to have conversations with people who were honest about their lives, One woman I went out with a few times asked about my divorce, and I gave her the short version. She said her ex had cheated on her for a year before she found out, and we talked about how hard it was to trust people after being lied to like that. We didn't end up being a match romantically, but we stayed friends. Most of the dates were fine, some were boring, a couple were actually fun. I wasn't looking for anything serious yet, just enjoying being around people without the weight of Laura's deception hanging over me. A year after filing for divorce, I was in the best shape of my life because I actually had time to work out. I joined the gym near my townhouse and started going 3 times a week after work. I did weights and cardio and started feeling stronger and healthier than I had in years. The irony wasn't lost on me that Laura's fake fitness journey while pretending to be sick had somehow led to my real one. I'd lost 20 pounds and built actual muscle, and people at work kept commenting that I looked great. I felt great too, physically and mentally. My life was completely different from what it had been during those 2 years of exhaustion and lies, and every part of the change was an improvement. My supervisor called me into his office 3 months after the divorce finalized and told me the department wanted to promote me to senior radiologic tech. The raise was significant, almost $15,000 more a year, and he said I'd earned it through my dedication and improved performance over the past year. I accepted immediately and realized that for the first time in years, I was actually advancing in my career instead of just surviving. My coworkers took me out for drinks after my shift to celebrate, and Jason raised his glass and said he was glad to see me getting back to being myself again. The promotion meant better hours too, more flexibility, and I could finally focus on doing my job well instead of constantly worrying about what crisis Laura would manufacture next. I started taking on additional training opportunities and mentoring newer techs, things I'd been too exhausted to consider during those 2 years of carrying everything alone. Laura's sister sent me a text message a few weeks later saying she thought I should know that Laura was working full-time now at a retail management position. She said Laura seemed to be doing fine, going to work every day without any problems, which was exactly what I'd suspected all along. The confirmation felt good, even though I already knew the truth. Laura had never been sick. She'd just been lazy and manipulative, and now that she had to support herself, she was suddenly capable of functioning like a normal adult. Her sister apologized again for not believing me sooner and said their father had cut off financial support to Laura once he saw all the evidence, forcing her to actually get a job. I thanked her for the update, but told her I didn't need regular reports on Laura's life anymore. That chapter was closed, and I had no interest in keeping tabs on someone who'd wasted 2 years of my life with lies. I booked a trip to Hawaii 6 months after the divorce, something I'd always wanted to do but could never afford when I was supporting Laura and covering all our bills alone. I used some of the money from selling the house and took a full week off work, my first real vacation in over 3 years. Sitting on the beach in Maui watching the sunset over the ocean, I felt genuinely happy for the first time in years. The weight of Laura's deception and manipulation was completely gone, replaced by this calm sense of freedom and possibility. I went snorkeling and hiking and ate at restaurants without checking my phone every 5 minutes for fake emergency texts. I talked to other travelers and laughed and felt like myself again. The person I'd been before Laura's lies had buried me under exhaustion and resentment. On my last night there, I sat on my hotel balcony and thought about how different my life looked now compared to a year ago, and I felt grateful that I'd trusted my instincts enough to document everything instead of continuing to doubt myself. Looking back now, I'm glad I didn't ignore what Jason told me about seeing Laura at the gym. I'm glad I investigated instead of accepting her explanations. I'm glad I documented everything and hired Tyson and fought for a fair outcome instead of just walking away. I got my life back, my finances are solid, and I'm surrounded by people who are honest and supportive. My career is thriving, my health is better, and I actually have time for hobbies and friends and taking care of myself. Laura made her choices and faced the results, and I moved forward without her dragging me down. Sometimes people show you exactly who they are through their actions, and the healthiest thing you can do is believe them and act accordingly. I learned that the hard way, but at least I learned it before wasting any more years on someone who saw me as a resource to exploit rather than a partner to respect.